This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Cherished Companions with Doug Wilbur. And today we have a guest with Doug, and she's actually sitting right next to me, everybody. This is Melinda Smith, and Melinda has a podcast with New Cleveland Radio as well called Heart Mojo.
Yep.
And what drew me to becoming Melinda's friend was hearing her talk about her life in senior services. And it was right at the time, Doug, that my mother had just passed away. I had just learned what home care was all about. And she's taught me a lot more. So, welcome, Melinda.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, Doug. I appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah. It's um, actually it's relatively spontaneous today because Karen said, "Hey, I have the perfect guest," and Melinda and I have over the years run into each other professionally,
Yep.
and I think that professional interaction, breeds a level of respect and to know that an individual has the same heart of giving care or being involved with those seniors or the elderly in our society. And I believe that when you kind of have those people with the same desire
Like
of
minds.
helping, right, exactly, like minds, it makes such a huge difference. So and one of the things that I know is some people have a wide array of experiences, and Melinda's one of those. And can you just tell me a little bit about, and our audience, a little bit about some of the things that you've been involved in as far as in this sector?
Wait, how much time do you have? No, I'm just kidding. Um, well, just a little bit back, I have somewhat of a medical background. So I always wanted to help people. So I worked in a medical office, and then I helped with my grandmother who was an Alzheimer's patient. My mom did the primary care, but they lived with me. So I know exactly what it's like to live in that situation with somebody
Right.
going through that process. And my mother now has my sister and myself to help. So we are caregivers ourselves with my mother. Thankfully, she's decent. She doesn't need a whole lot of care, but she definitely needs help. She's not driving. There's a lot of things that we do.
Right.
And back once my kids grew up, I started working for an elder law attorney, which gave me, I had an attorney background. I'd worked in my husband's office at the time, and he was an attorney. So that allowed me to get that feel for working in a law office. I learned a lot because in elder law, you're covering the whole spectrum from financial to the personal level with caregiving. Do we look for a location for mom or dad or whoever your spouse? So we had to cover that whole area and we had to refer to people. And that's actually how you and I first met when I was
Right.
working in that area. And then I moved on and started placing people in locations. So they couldn't stay at home anymore, or they didn't want to keep them at home anymore. So I worked in an industry portion where I could help find locations for them, memory care, assisted living, even independent living, just not in their home. From there, I actually worked in a location that was an assisted living and one that had nursing home care as well. So that gave me a different perspective, watching them come in, making the choice to come there versus home care. And then sometimes you need home care, you need actual care in those facilities as well, those communities. And so I moved into that. So I did work in the home care industry as well, non medical home care.
Okay.
So I have a perspective from all different areas, I guess. So,
Yeah, no, that actually is a really broad uh, uh, array of experiences. It's so often that people get involved in caregiving or the caregiving field because they've given
been
care.
there. Hmm.
Yeah, that's, I don't know how many people, and then, more often than not, people say, I fell in love with it.
Hmm.
I just loved this area. I remember talking to one of our caregivers that is truly one of the best caregivers that I've ever met, and she just needed a job. So she ended up going to work for an assisted living in a memory care area, and she said, I realized this is what I loved, and it surprised her, in that situation. Did you have that experience of being surprised a little bit about?
Well, yes and no, because I know what work it was, so that's never fun, right? It's
Right,
hard
yeah,
work. But what you see and what you get back is worth everything that you do. So, for example, when I worked in the community, just the little things, remembering small things to do for them was so important, like soup. Let's just use soup as an example. We had one resident who liked Campbell's tomato soup and only Campbell's tomato soup. She could taste the difference. The fact that, working there, we went out of our way to provide that for her gave her some quality of life back, I guess, because it meant so much to her. And you
right,
can do that whether they're very good assisted living facilities and they're very bad assisted living. And if you're a good one, you're going to always put the resident first. And that's the same thing with home care. If you're in
right,
home care, if you remember the small things, give them their dignity, treat them like an adult, treat them with respect, you're making such a difference in their life and the quality of their life. It's important. And I think home care with a good caregiver like the one you're talking about, she fell in love with it. That's what it takes. You have that experience. And my residents that I had there, I miss them. I wonder what happened to them. And when I can make contact with them and even I had a gentleman who loved tiramisu. He was from Italy. It was his favorite dessert. I would pick it up every so often and drop it off. Those things make the difference in care.
oh yeah, yeah. I've long said that I can teach technique, but I can't teach someone to have a heart.
Right.
Absolutely.
I can't teach someone to care. And really the difference between, and I don't care where you're at, the difference between a really wonderful caregiver and experience, that's tied in with that, and someone who is just okay or terrible even, is a hard issue.
Well, it's compassion. If you can put yourself or your mother, your family member in those shoes and see that person like that, hopefully that will bring that care level out for you, that compassion. Because, the old phrase there, but the grace of God go I, it will and can be you. And
Yeah,
would
so
you want to be treated that way?
I do all the final interviews for everyone that comes into the company, and which is a big thing because we're not a small company.
No.
But it's funny how often I hear a caregiver that I'm doing an interview, and this is, can be a little bit of a sign saying, I know that someday I'm going to be in need of care, kind of by the grace of God in a way, because that means you've lived long enough.
Right.
And they said, I want to give the type of care that I would expect someone to give. And, I hope that I'll get that same for me later on. But so your point is a really good point as far as, care. It really is that thing of being able to empathize or understand what someone else is going through.
Well, and to understand, sometimes you go in and they're angry, right? The person that you're dealing with is very cranky and angry. And you think, what did I do? You most likely did nothing. They're just angry at their situation. I've had a podcast, Karen and I did a podcast, and we talked about grief and loss of youth and loss of your abilities. And I would always tell a caregiver that I spoke to, just remember, this isn't about you. It's not about her being angry at you or him being angry at you. It's about her being angry at life or he's angry at life, that life put them in that situation. But if you can give them the understanding and let them know that you understand and empathize,
Right.
then they're going to turn a little bit and go, hey, you know what? They're really here to help me. And it's a much more giving and a better experience for both the caregiver and the client or the patient.
Yeah, no, that's good. Obviously you've had this wide variety of experiences, and are there any like grand takeaways? Anything that you say, with all these different experiences with those who are aging or dealing with the problems of aging, um, what are some of your discoveries or your aha moments or things that you say, this is an important takeaway?
Well, there's a lot of different types of takeaways. I guess it depends on if you're talking about being the caregiver yourself and understanding the person you're working with. I think a big takeaway for me was the soup was a prime example, because you figure tomato soup is tomato soup is tomato soup, right?
Right.
You order it when you're in the restaurant, you buy it at the store, you're going to buy different brands, but not to this lady. This lady, that was the most important thing in her day, and she had it every single day. So that was just a small thing, but it made her happy. It gave her the quality that she was looking for the things that she had given up by being put into an assisted living. So that was a big thing for me to understand that just that little piece, just that little thing made all the difference. And to somebody else, they would think, what's the bother? That's spoiling that person. Why would I bother to do that? That's why. Because it made a difference. Yeah. So that's an understanding that I don't think you can get until you've experienced it, until you've been there. Sometimes I think people need to look back at their children and what things, remember, I don't know how many children you have, but one of my children had blankets, little blankies.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, if he didn't have that blankie, there was hell to pay. It's no different with the senior.
Right.
And if you can equate that, because many of our caregivers are younger, they may have children, they may be in the mix of that. Maybe that's something they need to think about. What happens when, little Johnny doesn't get his blanket or his binky or his favorite toy? It's no different with the senior.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah, no, it's funny because many times I find that our caregivers gravitate to both ends. Mm-hmm. They sometimes will have people who've done childcare mm-hmm. and dealt with the elderly. So, as a matter of fact, our oldest caregiver used to run daycare centers. Mm-hmm. She's in her 80s now, and I think if I remember right, she's a brilliant lady. I think she ran 3 different child care centers mm-hmm. and things. But I've just noticed that it's often because in many ways there are strong similarities, and both are.
They talk about you start in diapers, you end in diapers, right? I mean, that's kind of the way it goes. There are strong similarities to that.
You brought something up, Linda, about there are many of our parents who have been forced to move to assisted living or nursing homes. And that takes away their dignity. Mm-hmm. And that's where the caregiver really comes into play in being compassionate and understanding. Because I think the majority of us want to be independent up until our last breath. We'd love to be in our homes. And sometimes for various family reasons, it just is not possible.
Right.
And right. I think we, all have to take a step back. Like both of you have said, how do we want to end our days? That's how we should be thinking about our loved ones today.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things I learned in the elder law firm was most people think that they will just one day die in bed. That's it.
Right.
And they're going to be healthy and they're going to be able to live their life. And just one day, boop, you're going to die. Most of the time, probably 99% of the time, it's not going to happen that way. You will need some help in some way or shape or form. whether it's from a loved one in your home or whether it's from a professional caregiver coming in. So I think that's something that people have to be told, to remind them of that the chances of that happening are pretty slim. The other
And they
thing,
need to make plans around that too.
absolutely,
Yeah.
they need to
Yeah.
make plans for that. And one of the other takeaways, back to your takeaway question, is for a caregiver coming in to understand there are cultural differences in people. This is not your home. This is their home. And it's not a hotel. So you need to treat their home with respect and their traditions and what they do. They, I've been around clients who know exactly where their silverware goes, exactly where that cup should go. And that's where they want it. And it's your
Right.
job as a caregiver to make them comfortable in their own home, right? And follow what they want. I know of another case with a lady who had roses, and the caregiver got the roses, came, she stuck them in a vase. It's what we think we should do, right? The woman went ballistic. Why? She needed the stems cut in a certain way, on an
Mhm.
angle, and put in. Most of our caregivers may not even know to do that. I mean, I actually do that, but
Right.
most people don't even think about doing that. And then the caregiver's upset because the woman's upset because she did what she was supposed to do, and it becomes an issue. I think one of the things we need to do with education with caregivers is having them understand their cultural differences, getting to know our clients enough that we can then give the caregiver a heads up. Does that make
And
sense?
yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I often, when we're doing our orientation, one of the things that I'll talk to our caregivers about is that so frequently when there's an issue between a caregiver and a client, it's when there is a difference in expectation.
Mm-hmm.
So the caregiver has one expectation, the client has a different expectation. And what you really want to do is make those things meet. So, and the only way you can really do that is by communicating. And I go and explain how that's why the communication piece is so important.
Absolutely.
And then I'll use, an example. My mom folded towels a certain way. Now, that is really actually very common. And is there a right and a wrong way of folding towels? No. There really isn't a right or wrong way. But there was a way that my mom felt was right. And so it was so ingrained in her that it would kind of drive her crazy if someone folded the towel differently. And my mom had dementia, and so she would even be instructing when she was very advanced in her dementia on folding the towels, because I remember saying something one time to her caregiver, and the caregiver said, yeah, she'll like change it around when I'm folding the towels and do it the other way. And it's a silly example, but it has meaning.
It had meaning to her.
Yeah, because that's the way
She
she
always
did it.
knew.
Right.
She must have been taught that when she was 2 and 3 years old.
Oh yeah,
to
and frankly, the way she folded her towels, I know exactly why she folded it that way. She grew up in upstate New York, and she was from kind of this proper family, that she had. And well, her family always had monograms on their fancy towels, okay? And so she folded it in such a way that the monogram would show, and that's how the towels were folded. It was folded that way, and specifically. And I, it was kind of afterwards, like, why did she fold things that way? And it dawned on me, it was for when they were placing, the nice towels out.
I'm so glad you said that.
We did that too.
Because my mother taught me how to fold towels that way. And I never understood
like
it.
this,
and now I realize my mother had monograms.
Or a design. If you have a design on it, same thing.
Yeah. And it was, but that again, it was, as your point is, which is, I kind of summarized, I was taking some notes, that small things make the difference.
Small things do make the difference,
Yeah.
because isn't that true in everyday life? I
Oh
mean, we
yeah.
all want the big moments, but when we sit down and look at life, it's really the grouping of the small moments that make a difference in someone's life. It's not
Oh
always
yeah.
a big one.
Yeah. I mean, it's even like when someone remembers something about you, and and um, and they do that little nice thing,
Hmm.
it pops. It makes a difference. You say, "Gosh, I can't believe that this person remembered that." I talk to our caregivers sometimes. They say, if you're giving someone a bath, um, throw the towels in the dryer before
So
you
they're warm.
do it, so they're warm. And you think older people run a little bit cold most of the
Hmm.
time. To have a warm towel put around you when you come out of the shower, if you have the ability to do that, that little thought, it is something that is like just a nice gesture. It makes a big
And
difference.
it's comfort. It's a
Right.
comfort
Yeah.
thing. I have to tell you, there was a lady when I worked for the placing company. The reason why she chose the location is pink was her favorite color, and they had pink roses. So once I moved her in, what do you think I came with for the day, the first day in? Pink roses,
Right.
because it was her favorite thing and it made her feel at home. And this was her new home. And I felt a responsibility helping her locate that home, to make sure that her first, week there, she felt comfortable looking at her pink roses.
So tell me, I'm
So,
just really out of interest because I'm in the home care area
mhm.
as far as what we're doing, and I have very specific reasons why I believe that and stuff. But when you are doing placement, when you're putting someone into various facilities, what did you find were important things for the people that were looking? What was it? And I bet you it was different, between what the kids were looking
I was
for.
just going to say that. The kids normally look for the newest, brightest, resorty feel. And normally that is not what mom or dad want. They want a homey feel. They want something that feels generational for them. Now, that doesn't mean old. That doesn't mean
Right.
not taken care of. That means a different feel to it. And to many of the kids that do the tours, they're like, oh, really? I like this one. Well, yeah, you do. You're a whole different generation.
Right. Yeah.
My mom is in a 55 and over community, so she's still an independent and there's no food but there are activities. But what I started to do to take away the fear is, if I did an event in a location, in a community, I'd bring her with me.
Hmm.
And I wanted her to see that it wasn't scary. That's another thing. So when my grandmother advanced too far for my mother to take care of her at home, and we didn't even think about home care, to be honest with you, because it depends where you're at in your life, right? So we didn't think about home care, and this was the early 2000s. So she went straight to a nursing home. Now, older people, that's what they remember. They remember their grandparents either dying in the hospital or going to a nursing home.
Right.
Not many people had home care unless they were super bad off and had a lot of money. It was families lived together, so they took care of each other. In today's world, that's not the case. We live all over the country and people have their own lives, and they don't have that same feeling that I have to be there for mom. My mother took care of my grandmother for 14 years. She moved to Florida. She lived with her. Then they moved back to Ohio, lived with me for almost a year. It was a lot of work, but she did it because it was her mother. That's not saying that you don't love your mother today or your father, but we have a different perspective on what we need to do, right, to take care of. But when you move somebody into that's the problem. If you have somebody who's 75 to 90s, their vision of moving into a community is nursing home, period.
Right. Yeah.
They don't see it as a livable, viable location. It's where you go to die. And that's really their vision. So they need to see the differences. And what my mom noticed is it was kind of comfortable. Like, oh, I love those old pictures on the wall. And everybody had, at first it was, who are all these old people? Because nobody
Right,
sees themselves as their age, right?
right.
Who are all
No,
these old people? But once she got there and saw some of the activities and things that were going on, it was kind of cool. She kind of liked it. Now, she still wasn't ready to go into assisted living, but she has a different perspective on it. And I think that also gave me a unique piece for placement, because I could see it from her eyes versus my eyes, and when I end up in that type of community, I probably would want a little newer one. I wouldn't go to the older style because it doesn't fit my generation.
right.
So I think
But your
that's,
kids are going to think, why is mom wanting this old style?
Yeah,
yeah.
so right.
To them,
Because
it'll
it's
be the old style.
right, exactly, because it'll be, something that's they have developed a new style and a new way of doing things.
Hmm.
Yeah, so often, the homes that we walk into, the house hasn't been updated in 20 years.
Right.
And because, people, you know,
It's
put it together and they made it the way they really loved it. And then, like so much, we kind of stick to it because that's what was
Right.
comfortable and that was, it was fine. It's very rare that you see someone that's kind
it's
of, to your
still your
point.
youth too. I mean, back to the podcast we had about baby boomers being angry
Yeah.
and millennials being angry with them because they don't get it. Why do you have to have all that stuff? Why do you have to have those Yarlos, whatever those figurines are, Hummels? Let's use
Oh,
Hummels.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
Why do you have those Hummels? Well, because it's something they got when they were probably 30, 40 years old. This is in their mind, their prime, right? And this is their memories, and this is what they have. And
Right.
we have to remember that, if you're a caregiver, whether you're a personal caregiver or whether you're a professional caregiver, these are their memories. These are their things. It means something to them, just like your things mean something to you. It's
Right.
not less valued.
Yeah. Um, one of the things that I do caution people though when they are going to facilities, if you're looking around, is and tell me um, if you feel like this is true or not, and
Mhm.
if you disagree, I really want you to disagree. Okay.
I have no problem speaking my mind. No worries.
But I think a lot of times you go into a facility and they're going to give you the dog and pony show.
Sure.
Because they're a
That's
facility and they are
their
trying
job.
to promote the facility. And one of the things I've often told people when they go into a facility is sit down, if you get the chance, sit down and just observe what really is going on. Not the tour, not the other, but observe what you can. I also suggest smell the air. Does it
Oh, yeah.
smell, does
Like
it,
urine.
Yep.
yeah, does it smell like urine or does it not smell like urine? And, look at the way people are interacting and things, because I do think, people are given the a show. And again, I'm not criticizing that,
No, it's
but
like buying a new car.
right. But the reality is, what does the day to day look like? And that's
Mhm.
when I think you'll see potentially, is this, something that I want or not want?
And people
So,
do change communities as well. And I think this last year, not to go back to COVID, because God knows we're finally getting on the other side, but I actually worked in the community during COVID and I had to do tours on Zoom. So I would take my phone or the iPad around and do the tour that way. But I would make sure that they would see if there were people, because you still could sit out in the community, whether you had a mask or you didn't have a mask, and that really varied according to where you were, because you can't make people do it when it's their personal space. So
right,
I would want them to see what went on. I would want them to see the people sitting and playing bingo socially distanced, right? So they
right,
knew that this is what was actually happening in the community. But to your point, this past year to year and a half, it has been extremely difficult for these communities to bring people in, not only because the families couldn't see each other, which, you can die from loneliness. You don't have to die from actually COVID,
Right.
but you could not get the feel for the community in real time in the way the world works, because nothing about our world was real to us, right?
Right.
It was a nightmare. It wasn't a regular life.
Yeah.
From the actual location to the caregivers that work there. As you know, we have a caregiver shortage, not only in the home care, but in communities themselves, because
Oh,
of
yeah.
fear and because of other financial issues that have occurred in our world that have encouraged not necessarily working. And since it's a difficult job, it's hard to get good people to want to be doing that job. So, in to your point about them understanding the location, this year has been extremely difficult for that industry, because no one could really understand the cultural, the climate, the what happened in a location, because it wasn't normal.
Well, I think what it did in many ways is um, it exposed some of the weaknesses
Mm-hmm.
in a institutional setting.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to run something by you, and people who've listened to the podcast have probably heard me say this before, but I I believe very strongly we're on the cusp of a new um, kind of a revolution in the whole area of aging.
Mm-hmm.
And and here's kind of what my theory is that there was this impulse that happened 150 years ago, we'll say, where things became institutionalized. We were in an industrial society that was looked as compassionate. So you had the orphanages,
Mm-hmm.
you had the mental asylums, you had the old folks homes, that were all developed around that time. And if you see, there has been a significant change in those areas. The same thing with um, um, developmental disabilities, people
Mm-hmm.
that where they were institutionalized, the individuals with those needs. And in virtually every area that I mentioned, it has moved away from institutional settings.
Mm-hmm.
It's moved away from that. So you don't have the orphanages like you did. They are really trying to bring them into a foster system. You don't have the situations with developmental disabilities. They, again, at they try to put them at worst in group homes,
Mm-hmm.
in that, or keep people in a home setting, which didn't happen when I was a kid.
Me either.
Yeah. And similar with the mental asylums,
Mm-hmm.
those are virtually, they're not completely gone, but they're pretty darn close to being gone. And I think the last vestige is that area for aging, because people see that institutional, you're not getting the personal or the one-on-one. And I feel like that this last year exposed some of those things, and we've seen a big uptick as far as how many people are wanting care and say, I don't want my parents in a facility,
Mm-hmm.
because they saw some of that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of that thought?
I think you're partially on the money with it. I do think you're going to have the very exclusive, expensive communities that are more like a home hotel, okay, like a hotel. And then you're going to have Medicaid, which will be more institutional. We will not have that middle ground. People are going to stay healthier and home longer, try to afford home care as long as they can. I do not think we're going to go back, even though you have kids moving in with their parents and living in the basement. I still don't think we're going to see the same generational homes that I grew up with when I was a kid. I think that's why Italy and Spain got hit so hard with COVID, because they had multiple generations that live in one home. Great grandparents, grandparents, from kids, all in one home.
Right.
So we don't have that here anymore, or rarely. We do have it in some parts of our country and in some cities, but for the most part, we don't have that. So I think you're going to see this level and this level. And I think those communities or facilities in the middle ground will disappear. They're going to be one way or the other.
Yeah, I just feel strongly that home care,
It's going to rise up with that.
is going to be the answer, which is what I felt. That's why I got involved. Is I felt like that it's, I've oftentimes used the analogy that it's like a dam with a hole in it, and you plug the hole, and the dam stays intact. That's what home care can do, is you kind of figure out where the holes are and you plug it up by having strategic help for those problems in someone's lives, and it allows them to stay in home for a
Much
very,
longer.
very.
It's interesting that you bring this up because my grandfather lived with us for about a year and a half um, before he went into the home for the aged. And it was very institutionalized back then.
Nursing home style.
And it was a scary place to go. And I wrote a blog about it yesterday because all of a sudden I was having these flashbacks of being afraid to go see him. I wasn't afraid of him when he was at our house, but 2 days later, once he moved out, I was afraid to go see him.
Oh yeah.
And my other set of grandparents lived in a home, and they were the same age, and I loved going over there, and wasn't afraid of them. And that's what has really upset me about some of these places that I've seen. Even when my mother was ill and we thought maybe she'd be better off with 24-hour care in a facility, when we saw the facilities, my brother and I just looked at each other and we said, she's not going to be strapped to a chair. She's not going to be ignored. We're not going to let her soil herself. And so we chose home care. And even with some of the home caregivers that weren't the best, it was the best situation for all of us. And I wouldn't do it any other way.
Well, there are locations, communities where you have the caregiver come in, so you can hire an outside. So it's kind of the assisted living light or independent living, where they need a little more care. They're not going to get it there, or you're worried they're not going to get it there. So you hire a service, a home care, to come in and fill that little gap. I think the problem that we're going to see is the financial cost to all of this. I mean, let's face it, home care is not inexpensive. I mean, there's a lot involved, and a lot of people can't afford that either. So I think you'll see maybe home care use for the bigger issues, and then the small things like grocery shopping, doing things like that, rides, where that won't be a home care person. That'll be a community person, because there is in this country a village network that's starting. So this village network varies. Some places it's free service because it's a nonprofit, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a for-profit with a small yearly fee. But it allows people to get those basic things, the little things that caregivers do as well, making lunch or picking up groceries or taking them to the salon for hair. It allows them to get that done by somebody who volunteers through this network, but it will still allow home care to be there for the bigger needs, the bathing and the things that a neighbor's not going to do for you, right? Mm-hmm. So I think you'll see a trend with that as well, because any care, whether you live in an assisted living or you have home care, is not an inexpensive process. And many people in the next generation have not saved for that. So the youngest boomers have not saved their money for that. They don't have long-term insurance. They don't have those things. They've spent their money.
And when you have most of the time, I will say that people, when they strategically use resources, and Karen's heard me talk about this before, when they strategically use resources, so the family does this part, if the family's around. And your point before, a lot of families aren't
Families are
around, but
not.
if the family is around, if, they do that, a neighbor does this part.
Mhm.
But what I think is important is that, and then you have home care do another part. And
Right.
so you piece together, and most of the time, when you piece together that, it is far less expensive
Then going
than
into an assisted
than
living.
going into a facility. That most of the time it is a huge savings.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I mean, I do, but that's what I'm saying. I think that you're going to see a rise up of some of that little extra side stuff so that you can afford the home care that you really do need
Right.
versus
Well,
little things.
and different counties like Geauga County, they do transport for people.
Right.
And so you're right that kind of the village idea, I think, is going to be will remain a really important piece, to this, because let's face it, one thing we know is that the caregiver shortage we're seeing now, right now, it's largely because of what the
COVID.
government is doing, and still, I think, some residual fear for COVID, and but we knew what's going on now was going to be happening in about 10 years, because there isn't enough people to do
Right.
care to fill the need. So the whole idea of the village is going to be critical, I think, in the future, that you are going to have these kind of pulled resources that people can do to be able to have our society function.
Well, this service type of job, the problem is kids come out of school with tech. That's what they think about. They want to go do tech. We don't have people coming out and being a plumber, working on the roads, doing the garbage and caregiving. And I'm not equating that to those things as far as it being a bad thing to do. It's just they're not looking at their life that way. They're looking at their life. I'm going to come out and I'm going to have a job, and I'm not going to work at McDonald's, and I'm never going to do this, and I'm not going to do that. That's
Right.
beneath them. Instead of looking at it as a service that, yes, they can make a decent living at and give back to someone else. It's a separation. And again, I'm going to go back to a generational thing. If you grew up with your grandparents, you understood the aging process. If you grow up in a fractured society, you don't know the aging process, do you?
Yeah.
So you
I
don't
think
have that empathy.
I think in many ways, there's probably some disadvantages to living in Cleveland at this point in time, because of the fact that there's, that we're not as booming as certain other areas. But one thing I have found is that Cleveland is a very small town because people stay here. So I was talking to a family today, and those that are really like dedicated, they stay. So there was one person out of town, and then 3 that were here, and they were close, and I do find that we have more multi-generational families in the Cleveland area than I think that happens in other areas where people have moved. Like you think about like some of our contemporaries who have moved away from the Cleveland area, they're not going to have the same support because they moved away.
Right.
And most likely their kids are going to move away from that area to somewhere else. So I do think there are some advantages in Cleveland, because we do have these networks of support because people have been here all their lives.
I do think people come back too. I know a lot of my friends whose kids are a little bit older than mine. They moved away, they moved to Chicago, they went to New York, they went to LA, and guess what? They're back home now with their families because it's a good place to raise a family, and it's
Right.
cost effective to live here versus LA or Chicago or New York. So, they kind of went out and sold sowed their wild oats out
Right.
and moved and then came back home. So I do agree with you. I think we have a homey community, and I think people notice that when they visit here as well.
Yeah, because you have to be dedicated to have stayed here.
Right.
Right.
So there's a natural loyalty, I think, built into
Mhm.
people that have remained in Cleveland anyway. So
Once a Browns fan, always a Browns fan.
that's right, whether it makes sense or not.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well,
And
I'm so glad that I brought the two of you together today, because last month, Lisa and I talked about caregiving and the difficulty of finding qualified caregivers. I mean, there's lots of people out there who say, yes, I want to do it. And after the first day they do it,
They're done.
they're gone.
right,
And today, it just made so much sense from two different perspectives of what the issues are and what we all need to do. Because, like you said, Melinda, we're all going to get there.
Mhm.
And so it's time to start thinking about it and participating and creating those communities.
Proper planning.
yep, that's good. And I'm always a learner. I've always am trying to take in information. And so, I wrote down your 3 big points that you had said when I did that. And I know you had no pre-knowledge that I was going to ask, but I really agree, with it. And I'll repeat at least those 3 things that I wrote down, that the small things make the difference. That you look at your children and kind of see how they respond to things and think of those older in that same way, and understand that there are cultural differences in people. And I think those are 3 great learnings that I got from today, and hopefully others, derive their own learnings from this. So thank you. Thank you for being, taking the time and being part of the podcast.
No, I
So,
appreciate it. I had a good time, and I think it's important. I think it's important that people understand their options, and that people who are in the industry like yourself, it's your company, you really do care and you want to give the best service possible. It's not just about, oh, I'm just going to do this so I can make money at it, right? It's about the person, and it's about finding the right person to match so that they feel like family. They may not be family, but they need to feel like they're family.
right, that's great. Well, we'll have you back at some point in time, okay?
Okay,
If
great.
you-
It's wonderful.
good. I got a commitment. See.
Well, we wish
Anyway,
every-
thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Have a great
Take
day,
care.
everybody. Bye-bye. now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.